Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 54 of the Say Again podcast with me, Amrita Tripathi. Every week, we bring you conversations with leaders, domain experts on some of the innovation trends that we need to be aware of. We talk a lot about AI. We talk a lot about what's going on in their own professional lives and careers. And as of this season, we're dropping episodes every Friday. So I hope you get a chance to catch up on the conversation over the weekend. Today, I'm delighted to be in conversation with Shriram Parthasarathy. He's a marketing professional unlike any other I've known. We can talk to him about content IPs, several centers of excellence in the digital space, and he's someone who has spent close to 13 years at Microsoft, including global marketing operations leader for Asia. I think, Shri, that was your last role at Microsoft, and our paths crossed a little bit before that. But thank you so much for joining, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Amrita. It's a pleasure being here and always a delight talking to you.
So, Shri, we were just talking a little bit earlier about how you also enjoy observing and commentating on different aspects of marketing, culture, human behavior, and inclusion. So, we will split up our chat and hopefully hit some of your favorite talking points and topics as well. I want to start by asking you, we're winding down the year. As far as I'm concerned, that cannot come soon enough, but we have still a few weeks to go. Take us through a little bit about what you're interested in when you're looking at trends. And I will talk to people about your newsletter because I'm going to link to it. It's been really fascinating to read your views in your newsletter. The second to last one, you talked about the rise of the Enshittification. I'm going to share a screenshot so people know what I'm talking about. What is that about, and how important is this? This idea that the standard user experiences are deteriorating, and the impact that's having.
Yeah, and Amrita, I completely echo your thoughts. I can't wait for the year to end any sooner. I think what has happened this year is with the whole wave of technology that is kind of pushed on not just in 2024 but towards the end of 2023, when the whole there was a different checkered flag, if you may, on generative AI, which kind of kicked everything off. It has gone through a complete evolution from what it means for the users and how it has democratized access to a lot of skill sets in people who may not necessarily would have honed it over a period of their lives. For example, someone who is probably a great entrepreneur may not necessarily be a great creator, or somebody who is a great creator may not necessarily be, a great businessman. But I think what has happened over the last couple of years, specifically with AI coming in, there's a lot of democratization of skill sets that we are getting to see. What has also happened in the past decade, if you were to just rewind ourselves to past decade or a couple of decades, there is a lot of digital first technologies coming in, whether it is Google on the search side, whether it is Amazon on the e-commerce side, and so on. So when I kind of spoke about Enshittification, it actually stemmed from an article that was written by Shefali Bhatt for the Mint, where she actually spoke about how we are basically moving towards paying for something that inherently have been free to access and inherently have been like the core services. For example, she spoke about if you want to talk to somebody in a call center, how it is getting difficult, and you probably get to someone talking at a human speaking to you at the call center maybe in the fourth or the fifth attempt. So how difficult it is getting to really work through the platforms to get beyond the automated bots that are there, and get to actual people speaking to us. And if you were to think about the 1990s or the 1980s or even 2000s for that matter, person talking to person would not be so difficult to imagine, because that was the only way we knew how to engage and converse.
Yeah.
So that kind of got me into a rabbit hole on into down the rabbit hole with Enshittification, which again triggered from another newsletter that I wrote the week prior, where I spoke about the word of the year list that Oxford and Cambridge and Merriam-Webster and Macquarie and all these guys start putting it out, and which is where I found it really fascinating, because I never could figure the deterioration of a platform or the platform economics, both in terms of experience and in terms of user sentiment.
Yeah.
And which is where I found out that there's probably a word that qualifies that, and which is where I found it fascinating, and that took me to listening to Cory Doctorow, the person who actually coined the term. where we are looking at essentially how the platforms really emerge and evolve over a period of time, right? So, one, at the very start, we want to acquire a lot of customers. We want to acquire people onto our platform, onboard onto our platform at scale. And you would typically see this with any of the digital apps, whether it's Amazon or whether it's Google and so on and so forth. And then we come and talk about how do we serve the right content to them, right? So that we keep them hooked because stickiness is the ultimate currency. The more people stay on, the more people leave their digital footprint and the preferences, so which can be monetized over a period of time. And in the second stage, we also find as platforms also find the advertisers and partners who would want to come and advertise to reach the same audiences that we would have acquired in stage one. And then as we go along to stage three, it is where, your whole hell breaks loose because at that time, we are kind of optimizing the profit and the revenue side of the business, but not necessarily catering to the user attention and the user preferences to the level that we had committed for in stage one. And which is where user experience as a concept probably goes down. And coincidentally, around the same time when I was writing about this, I also happened to stumble upon a post on LinkedIn where someone spoke about on Amazon a lot of the first few results that you see when you search for any product are essentially sponsored results, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that has predominantly happened because there's a commercial angle to it. And
Yeah.
someone was actually building a web plugin that could keep the sponsored results away and get users to the rightful results that they should be shown at the first time, which I found very interesting. But it's just a little hard to imagine and hard to live with that. We have to get to a stage where we need like an external plugin to really work with the system that is originally meant to serve a genuine experience at the end
Yeah.
of the day. Right. So when I think about 2026, I would say there is going to be a lot of noise, which we are seeing even now on what AI can do. Some folks are talking about the bubble and no bubble and so on. I would say, if anything, we may probably emerge a little more clearer in 2026, not just as individuals, but also as organizations in terms of how the strategy has evolved and how we can make AI a little more real for people beyond the use cases that we talk about right now. The second aspect that I see, or I wish rather, to happen is a lot more empathy on how we conduct ourselves. So, because with technology, although it's a great democratizing agent, but it is also a great dividing agent where it's the haves and the have-nots to a certain extent. Now, obviously, it's not as disparate as it was in the 19th and the 20th century, but it is still going to be on what kind of skill sets people have versus what kind of skill sets people are desired to have. Right. So that's going to be a very important thing. And that's where I feel that there is a need for us to be empathetic to really take everyone along, and both for organizations that are in the profit space and organizations that aren't as well. So I would say those are the two big things. And the rest, I think, it's going to be anybody's guess in terms of what's coming up.
Yeah, I know. There's so many things. Well, actually, so many threads to pick up from what you just shared. And thank you for that. That's a very comprehensive take. Well, firstly, let's give a shout out to Shipali. I think her columns always make us learn something new. I think also, seeing that hopefully that there is still a value placed to original reporting, original content
Yeah,
creation.
sure.
And I think one of the funniest, funny, not haha, but tragic funny comics I saw recently was that, this rise of AI slop, or the rise of our dependence rather on certain Gen AI tools, means that people are using them to create the content, and then they don't have the time to read that content. So they're using Gen AI to,
Right.
consume that content and summarize it. So when you look at this all, because we both, of course, do have an appreciation of good content. We have an appreciation of and an affinity to people who are creating, right? It's one of the great, I think, gifts that humans have. But when you look at what's been called AI slop, and at the same time we balance that out with what you just said, is that sort of Gen AI uptick has also democratized in some sense. There's so many ways to upskill. It's easier than ever to set up a small business now, for example, I will say. When you look at that versus this maybe over dependence on tools like LLMs, in this content space, and perhaps as a marketeer as well, what are some of your concerns and what are some of the things you think are still a great opportunity?
I think before starting with um, the human side of it in terms of what it is. I think it's a great opportunity for the algorithms and the platforms really to work their magic and, probably do another update in the way they kind of optimize content on the platforms. And I'll give a very simple example. Over the last few months, we've seen a lot of commentary and content coming through on how one should use or not use M dashes and how LLMs have and they just kind of sprinkle the M dashes more on the content that they kind of put out against every prompt that goes in. But I think that's an opportunity for the algorithm because now let's say, for example, if it's a LinkedIn or an Instagram or a TikTok or Twitter, I haven't gotten to call it X even now. But I think it's a great opportunity for the algorithms to really optimize the content, which can actually integrate some of these elements that come across as close to what an LLM would, and then thereby kind of promote authentic content. Now, if you were to kind of go back to the Google era, that's exactly what happened, where search, nobody saw search the way people started experiencing it in the early 2000s, and everybody started creating a lot of websites and blogs and their own digital presence. But over a period of time, there was domain authority when it came to websites, which where Google kind of rewarded people with a lot of original content rather than duplicacy that's available on the internet. I think even on the LLM side, over a period of time, it's going to go down that route, and I hope it does, because that's the only way of reserving authentic content. And we saw this with a lot of the LLM companies also kind of tying up with Reddit, for example, where they felt that Reddit probably is one of the sources that gives a lot of authentic content, right? So I think that's one. One is where it will gravitate towards, and the second is where the engineers behind these tools should kind of see how they can tweak the algorithm to drive more recognition for original content. That's one. The second thing is, I think what will also tend to happen is because the LLM content pretty much kind of has a lot of lookalikes in terms of if I'm putting out a prompt, and what is also happening right now is a lot of people are sharing their prompts as well, saying that, hey, the way you've been optimizing ChatGPT is completely wrong. Here are 5 different prompts to do it right.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't agree with that approach because that's just fear mongering. Besides the point, I think when you think about everybody just putting out the prompts very easily and a lot of people also going on to use those prompts, kind of in the output that you would get, it's going to be close to similar, if not completely similar, because it can't be completely the same because the context of every individual will be different, but it will be a lookalike rather than an original piece of content. And there again, I feel the LLM platforms itself, I mean, on the data side, they would need to kind of play a lot more in terms of how they are able to cull out different ways of presenting the same information, but also the content when it goes out on the platforms, there is an opportunity for, again, the engineers to kind of work through the algorithms to see what they optimize at the end of the day. In terms of the risks, I completely hear you on, a lot of the designers and a lot of the writers, the journalists, the copywriters, etc. They have a lot of anxious moments. But I would say it's like how it took a great deal of tweaking for somebody who would write a 300 or a 400 word article to write a 20 to 30 word advert on Google. I think people will also kind of skill themselves up, and if they aren't already, they should rather, to kind of see how they can get the best of both worlds on preserving the originality and also kind of optimizing the time to market, essentially, because that is what AI is helping people do today, right? So I think those are some of the aspects that we see right now with the scenarios that we're seeing around us. But I do feel that especially in marketing, there is a greater opportunity for us to really think about how do we better serve the buyer, because the reality is, especially in the B2B world, buyers actually coming to look for taking an action on a brand when he or she has already done 70% of the work, because there are 70% of the decision or the information seeking that is happening either through word of mouth or it is happening through networks and so on and so forth. So essentially, a lot of the marketing that is being done today is catering to that 30% of the buyer journey. And how do we kind of get more smarter to that? So which is where a lot of the work on automation, the marketing automation platforms, a lot of the work on the CRM side. I think those are real good opportunities for us to really think about, because if content is given, if creation of content is given, the next best thing to do is how do we optimize the connection? And honestly, I think that is where the value creation would really happen. It's not just about how much content you put out there, but it's about how meaningful you're able to connect with your customers. And that's where I think there is still some way for AI to go, and people can use AI to create that incremental value for the customer and for themselves as well.
And use it more to enhance, right, or use it as a
Yeah,
tool, as we've been told. I
that's right.
do I will digress for a minute to say, Shri, and shout out to Mohit, who connected us when we used to do those campaigns at the company formerly known as Twitter. And when you were at
Yeah,
Microsoft, you were someone who actually, so I was heading content partnerships there, and we were working on these. We're not sharing anything confidential here before anyone worries. We were working on these
yeah,
campaigns together, and I always found it interesting that you were actually very, very interested in the details. You were very interested in who is the content partner. Of course, that would be like any
yeah,
client, but you were
yeah.
really I think in the weeds in terms of the
Correct. Yeah.
details. And I just want to understand from you in terms of how things have changed now, where when it
Mm,
comes to marketing. And
mm.
if we presume that this era of AI slop will last for a little bit before perhaps people come back to valuing human curated and human created content, the same way I was told that it took a while for people to come back to valuing like handmade, hand sewn, hand embroidered,
Yeah, yeah,
crafts and
that's right.
textiles.
Yeah.
Do you think then for for folks, they're going to need better filters? Firstly, they're going to need a better connect with their audiences and clients to understand what resonates, what doesn't. Because we're also hearing at the same time that let's say a younger demographic like Gen Z apparently is much bigger on the individual and is picking up an authenticity in a way perhaps that a previous generation wasn't necessarily.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because it's not just about what is let's tackle the AI piece in a bit, but I would say purely if you were to look at humans, for a very long time we used to say that, hey, there is more credibility for people talking to people versus a brand talking to people, right? So the whole authenticity of how I as an individual would represent a brand and have a conversation with you as a prospect is going to be way more valuable than a company coming and talking to you from their official accounts and so on and so forth. And what is happening with the Gen Z is they've kind of captured that, because they're also kind of leveraging the platforms that allows them to do that, right? So Instagram and TikTok in the US and a lot of the other markets where the platform is available, there is just so much awareness, engagement, and conversion that is happening right now, which the Gen Z is able to kind of leverage very easily as compared to the traditional platforms that existed about still exist, but that were created about 15, 20 years ago. I think there are two areas, coming back to the AI element, that would influence some of this behavior going forward. There are two areas where I feel it's going to be both blessing. AI is a blessing for that, but also there is a lot of hard like work that needs to be put in. One is research, because for example, the kind of campaigns that we would run, a lot of times what I would feel is how much research has been done by folks who are working with us on the content. And that used to be the differentiator in terms of how do you evaluate a good campaign versus an excellent campaign, or someone who is a good partner versus a great partner, in terms of the depth of research and the depth of translation of that research into a conversation. Because at the end of the day, for us, everything was driven by conversation on Twitter and so on.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, research, again, with the help of the AI tools, it has gotten easier, where it is not just limited to a handful of people. Everybody can have access to the same tools, and they can go in depth with research. And which is where I think the first skill needs to be optimized, where a lot of the marketeers were not really tuned towards doing research themselves, right? So here's an opportunity for the marketers to say that, hey, rather than depending on an agency or a content partner, I can do this research myself and figure out what is my complete differentiator, what should be my messaging, and so on, all by myself. But for a long period of time, a lot of the marketers were used to kind of handing that off to the agency and getting it done. So now I think it's an opportunity for us to really say that, hey, how do we be better prepared as marketers so that one, we are able to land or conceptualize the campaigns better. Two, we are able to have the right briefing to the content agencies, and we are able to articulate what is it that we can do ourselves and what is it that we want of them, because that has been a gap, right, in terms of really recognizing that what we are good at and what we want others to do. And the second skill set, along with research, I would say, is the way to read and interpret um, data. For a lot of times, what we would often see is it's easy to get data because there are platforms and tools that are available that would give you all the trend lines and so on and so forth. But turning those data into insights would always be a human
Yeah.
skill that would
Yeah.
come through.
Yeah.
Now, what has happened the with the LLMs coming in is some part of that conversion of data to insights can also be enabled by the LLMs. But now the bigger question is, if you have 20 insights, how do you prioritize which insight is relevant for you to win the conversation with a stakeholder,
Hmm.
right? So I think that is where I feel where AI has helped us move the needle and walk the way on some of the tasks that we have. But here's an opportunity for us to really say that if that amount of time and if that amount of insights are already given to us, how do we make that more robust and
Yeah.
take it to the stakeholder and win the conversations faster, or get more deals in. So I think
Yeah.
that's a big one.
And it's interesting because you were also saying earlier that it can enable you to go deeper. So like the positive side is, of course, again, as a tool, it's pretty unmatched. It's a pretty incredible era if we zoom out and look at
Right.
so I'm also a little bit like hopeful of what comes
Yeah.
next. But and that we've been doing some of the storytelling in the mental health
Correct.
space as well.
Correct.
There
That's right.
is so much anxiety, I think, across the board because we've seen already like some huge, job losses. There's attrition. There are
That's
people
right.
worried
Yeah.
that they're going to be replaced, and it's not an unfounded fear because it's happening
Right.
in front of us.
Right.
And at the same time, as we said, I don't want to like fall for the fear mongering because I think a lot of this
Mhm.
is seen through that lens of fear, right? Like you're going to be
Correct.
made redundant or irrelevant. And as we discussed a little bit, you also have the opportunity to upskill in a way that perhaps was not possible even a few years ago.
Right.
There's access to that skill set. I want to talk to you a little bit as towards this back half of this chat now to talk about both professionally and personally, when it comes to dealing with challenges, when it comes to resilience, and that's something we've been hearing at least since the pandemic, right? For the
Right.
greater part of the
Yeah.
population, that this is a skill that we're all going to need. We're going to need to be flexible. We're going to need to be resilient. What are
Right.
your thoughts there?
Right.
And we'll talk a little bit about your own journey as well.
Yeah. And I think the I'll just touch upon that anxiety part of it. And I think one of the ways that people can really, again, it's going to work differently for different people. It's not going to be a one size fit all solution. But I think there's a great opportunity for us to actually do some deep work, right? So because there is so much noise available on LinkedIn and the other platforms on all over the media, there's an opportunity for us to just shut all that out and just focus on skill sets that we want to really build on, whether it is ad tech or whether it is marketing automation or whether it is teaching and working with students, for example. So those are areas where we really can skill ourselves and get deeper, because I think even if AI is democratizing a lot of access and information at scale, as an input over a period of time, it would still need specialized information to kind of get into the system so that the output 10 years down the line becomes way more richer than what it was today. On the second part of resilience, and I think it's kind of a good segue into the resilience, because this is one of the ways that people can actually be more resilient, where they are more confident of their skill sets, they are more confident of their areas of expertise, and they are also not afraid to go and try out different things. And that's one thing I think it's a great opportunity for us to learn from the Gen Zs, where it's the bold nature of how they take things head on, and it's also the more flexible nature on how they kind of sidestep and figure out, hey, if this is not working for me, I'll go and do something else, right? So the whole flexibility in their approach is extremely good to have.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and when it comes to me as resilient, I hear a lot of people call me resilient over a period of time, and I think they kind of come from the place of looking at the things that I've done over a period of time, and I never could figure out why they're calling me resilient. But I think for me, it was never a choice essentially to be resilient. Like I couldn't figure out any way else to do it, and then that kind of comes from who I am, right? So I am this whole marketeer and all the labels that I've acquired over a period of time. But originally, I was born blind, about close to 4 decades ago.
Mm.
been a Bombay boy all my life, studied at an integrated school, which again was difficult to imagine for somebody with a disability at that point of time. And, a lot of kudos and props go to my parents to kind of, take that step at that point of time. And then kind of did integrated schooling at college, did my MBA in marketing, all with the visual impairment, with the deteriorating vision period of time. So a lot of technology, both on the analog side and the digital side. On the analog side, I used to use a lot of cassette tapes very early on to where my mom would record all the chapters and the lessons and so on and so forth. And then I would listen to it, and that's the way I would prepare for my schools and the exams there. And then in the early 2000s, I switched over to computers, and where we had screen readers and digital technology that kind of helped me and still continues to do so
Yeah.
get through all things computing, whether it is, even having this conversation or whether it is sourcing information or doing all the research and
Yeah.
even engaging with individuals and so on and so forth. So everything is down to the digital computing. So and through all this, for me, and my approach has always been that there is always a solution to every single problem. Right now, sometimes it gets me in a little bit of a pickle where people are not necessarily looking for a solution, but they just want you listening here. Sometimes it does happen that way. But for a lot of time, I'm always like, hey, there's always a solution. We can always figure by trying things out, right?
Yeah.
And that is where I think, some people call it being resilient. Some people call it having a growth mindset. Some people call it, having a solution first mindset. I'm like, that's just me.
That's just you.
Yeah.
I love that. So in I'm going to put up your X. I still call it Twitter, but I guess I have to move to X as well. Your Twitter bio. What I loved was, there's so when you all see this, Shri has, and he has updated it. It says marketing and storytelling, championing accessibility and inclusion, which I'm going to come to and link back to the bigger conversation we're having on AI, and then blind by sight, not vision, as well as music, culture, conversations, and coffee for the soul. And I thought it was such a well crafted bio because it's like, and what you said about Gen Z as well. I was having a conversation with someone last week who said what they love is that their Gen Z colleagues don't define themselves by their jobs or
Right.
designation, right? And
Right.
in a way, I feel like your bio also reflects that. There's so many strands to identities, but we tend to pick one, or the world will pick one. And, that whole narrative gets framed around that. I really appreciate your sharing, with us a little bit of your journey. And I do want to ask you, it turns out this week, I think it was December 3rd was International Day
Yeah,
of
that's right.
Persons with
Yeah.
Disabilities. I do want to ask you a little bit about language. And if you want to just share with us in terms of framing, and when people if there are journalists or media folks listening to this, are there any thoughts on language that you'd like to share with us that's inclusive? And we can use that. The second part of your answer can be a little bit more on, what we need to see from the sort of AI companies now to ensure that their data sets are more inclusive, to ensure that, this revolution is as inclusive as possible. I think some of the inequities we've covered in previous conversations with folks on, emerging markets versus the
Right.
first world. But when it comes to another layer of inclusion, you can share your take as well.
Yeah, and I think the blind by sight, not vision, is basically recognizing for uh, who I am. I still have a vision in terms of what I want to be and what I see the different aspects that I deal with day in day out, whether it's marketing, whether it's communications, whether it is accessibility, and how they should evolve and what's an ideal state that they should be in a few years' time. And sight is just a thing that I can't control, right? So, what is it that is in your control and what is it that's out of your control is how I kind of differentiate myself, and which is where um, when we think about language and the way we converse or engage with people, one is it's always people first, right? It's not a label that comes before a person, right? So, and very simply, if you were to just zoom out from the whole disability element of it, when you introduce somebody, you introduce them by name. Unfortunately, there is no better way to introduce. That's like the first thing that you would always go and do that. But you don't go and say that, hey, here is somebody who's done so much, blah, blah, blah. And then you come and say that, hey, by the way, this person's name is XYZ. We don't do that, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
hence the way we engage on who somebody is basically the right way of approaching We call it people first language, where you don't put disability as a first label, but you put individual as a first thing. So when we say people with disabilities, it exactly represents that. We are where you're putting people and disability comes in later. When we say individuals with visual impairment, you're putting the individuals first and then the visual impairment. And some people are okay, to be honest, where they say that, hey, I'm a disabled person, where you use disabled as an adjective. Um, there, before talking about the person. But over a period of time, I think the society has a good part of the society has kind of evolved into that people first. But there are still people who get a little confused on, hey, yeah, should I call him blind? Should I call him XYZ and so on, right? So I always say that certain people may have preferences, but the preferred way in general, or a safer way, I would say, is to put an individual first and then talk about the disability.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the opportunity with a lot of data sets that would get built over a period of time here on is also going to be huge, because the way we code, or the way we kind of input our details into the system, that could effectively become the database that kind of churns out a lot of the output over a period of time. It's important to get that language right. It's important to have the right representation, right? So when we say, do we have perspectives from women? Do we have perspectives from persons with disabilities? Do we have perspectives from people with generational diversity? Do we have perspectives from LGBTQIA plus? So I think a lot of the products that we will build would need to be representative of the perspectives of these people, because these are the users at the end of the day. So it's going to be important to take everybody along, not just at the output stage when somebody's using the product, but also at the input stage, at the design
Yeah.
stage
Yeah.
itself, right? So I think that is something that we've been talking in the context of accessibility for a long time, where we say that, it should be built in versus bolt on.
Mm.
But I think that is common to any and every kind of diversity that we're talking about right now, and any and every kind of individuals that we are going to look at, because that is what is going to make any solution richer
Yeah.
at the end of the day, right? So that's
Yeah.
going to be the value that we create over a period of time.
Yeah, and that really ties into the conversations, I think, globally on the quality of data also that, LLMs are built on. And I think someone very succinctly put it as garbage in, garbage out, which was, I think,
That's
the
right.
first
Yeah,
iteration. And now when we're
absolutely.
talking about the importance of, I think, inclusion, the importance of, sort of equities being built into the conversations, that's a
Correct.
bigger one as well.
Correct. Correct.
Shri, thank you
Yeah.
so much for that. I want to ask you a little bit about, professionally and personally now, like we're going to be coming to some of your recommendations, including this podcast, folks, because I have also tapped Shri as one of our early audience members, and I'd love to get his feedback. But when it comes to, your professional journey, I'm always curious to hear how folks navigate, sort of changes in their own careers, whether it's a mid-career transition, whether it's a re-evaluation of success and failure. Because I think when we start out, especially in our 20s, they're very different milestones that we set up for ourselves. I'm going to achieve X. I want to do Y. And,
Right.
several years in, and
Mm.
I still have, I think, a few years on you, but I will say the 40s are a great time for,
Yeah.
reflection and sort of some introspection in terms of what success looks like today. Have you
Mm.
changed your definition? Have your milestones changed? What are things that keep you going in terms of this kind of professional career ladder?
I generally break it into two parts in terms of the short term and the long term. So the short term is the one that I need to deliver. The long term is the one that I hold on to. And generally, the short term is essentially what are the immediate KPIs of the role. So whether I'm delivering X revenue, whether I'm delivering Y milestones on the campaigns, and so on and so forth. Now that is all going to help me on delivering what is the here and now, which needs to make sure that the one moves swiftly from one quarter to the other. What I hold on for the long term is how my personality has evolved over a period of time, right? So have I built in a lot of skill sets over a period of time? Am I getting incremental value to myself with the job that I do? I'll give you an example. When I started off my professional career about 15 odd years ago, the first job that I did was with a healthcare startup, setting up their online marketing practice. Now, I was coming fresh out of a B school where digital was still not a core module that people would teach as part of the curriculum. So a lot of the things that I had to do was pretty much on the job, learning by doing and getting my hands dirty on figuring things along. Then when I moved to Microsoft, the thing that I was missing in the startup was, how do I really scale? How do I bring structure to the way I operate, right? So that's what I learned from Microsoft over the last few years. And then when I think about the pivot that I am right now, I'm really looking at how do I get closer and closer to business accountability, right? Because tomorrow, 2 to 3 years down the line or 3 to 5 years down the line, people would really want to, people would want to talk to me if they, if in any forum, if I am able to translate and help them articulate on what is the value of marketing to business, which is again, it's a it's a constant endeavor for any marketer. You would hear from anybody. But I would say with a lot of the AI and with a lot of the technology influence coming in, there is going to be a higher expectation on what marketers and what additional value they can provide. Right. So I think that's where there is a pivot right now. So
Interesting.
which is where I think, over a period of time, I would say that, hey, have I become a better individual, either as a team player or as a manager or as a this thing? So, what is the human quotient of my growth
Yeah.
and what is the professional quotient of my growth? And I think I keep those two things separately because it helps me visualize, how I need to operate at different times of my life.
Sure, that's a great framework actually, and I will. I'm making a mental note to apply this to myself. This as we
Yeah,
wind down the year. Of course, it's a
yeah,
time that people start thinking about resolutions.
absolutely. Yeah,
So I want to
yeah.
ask you about your writing because I was very,
Uh-huh.
very pleasantly surprised to read you, and I think you write really well. You have a gift for I think also synthesizing pretty complicated concepts and applying
Yeah,
them. You have
yeah.
several interests, as we discussed briefly. We'll have to do a follow-up chat to come on the culture and music and bit.
Right.
But take us through that anecdote you had on how you set a resolution for writing once, but that's not what's
Yeah,
worked for you.
yeah. No, a couple of years ago, we were doing this. Hey, how do we recognize, or what is that memento for the team as a team that we take forward into the new year? So I think either 2021 or 2022, this thing. So as a team, we were a team of about 15 odd people. We said that, hey, let's build a resolution collage where you have resolutions of about 15 or 16 odd people, and that kind of helps us not only understand what makes other people tick, but also is there a way for us to really enable those resolutions for other people as well, right? So that was the whole philosophy behind putting that together. And my resolution was, I would write about 50,000 words in that calendar year, and I couldn't go past 1,500. so, so 3 years later, earlier this year, I said, I'm not really going to look at resolutions as such. I'm just going to start with something. Let's see where it takes me. I'm not really putting any kind of measurement or outcome that I want to drive. The only outcome that I want to drive from here is, one, I want to be super disciplined with writing, putting dedicated time towards writing every week. And the second is I want to go and dive into topics which kind of keeps me curious through the week. So there is always something or the other I keep coming across every week. How can I understand that a little better? So which is where, the point that you made on simplifying the complex really comes in, because it is also an exercise for myself, saying that how am I able to internalize that for myself and then kind of put it out there. So which is where writing about it kind of helps a little, because that helps structure your thoughts as well, and gives a little bit of a
Yeah,
frame
yeah,
to put it when you see it in front of you, right?
yeah.
I did that starting April. We've been sitting in December, still going through with it. Only time will tell, but I'm certainly not kind of calling it a resolution when we hit Jan 1st, 2026 for sure.
Yeah, maybe that labeling wasn't helpful for you.
Labeling wasn't helpful at all. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I really enjoy reading it. So
Yeah.
I definitely hope you keep writing
Yeah.
it. And as long as, and I think that curiosity you mentioned is like such a through
Yeah.
line because it is
That's
something that is also inspiring. It makes you want to dig into some of these topics
correct.
more.
Yeah.
What are some of your recommendations? Second last question for you for
Mhm.
the moment. Recommendations to read, listen, watch, sports. I know I was looking at
Yeah.
your X and there's a lot of like sports, which I didn't realize earlier.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, Ashes is definitely top of my cards. At least, early Jan, I'm just going to be glued on to the England-Australia cricket matches that are happening right now. I think on the reading side, currently I'm reading Alchemy by Rory Sutherland, and I've also downloaded Ogilvy on Writing. I wanted to kind of go back to the basics a little, right? So,
Yes.
a couple of months, I think a month ago, I did a course on SEO because there was a lot of this conversation on SEO versus generative engine optimization, all that. I'm like, I want to go back to the basics and really kind of, pull myself again to say that, hey, whatever I've done 15 years ago, how
Yeah.
relevant it still can be. It can still be here, and then how AI can help that. So, and Ogilvy and Writing is again a similar mindset that I've applied there. We're saying that, hey, everybody is talking about LLMs. Can I just go back to the basics of writing, to go with? So I think
Nice.
those are two
Nice.
books that are top of my reading list at this moment. I think on the podcast, I would say again for sure.
Yay.
And I think I was actually listening to the conversation with Nikhil Taneja, where he kind of captured the whole aspect of empathy so well. How
Yeah.
teaching as a profession helped him be a good listener and be more empathetic over the course of his life. That's so important. And I think the conversation with Sanjay Narayan as well, the Jaipur Literature Festival, I think that was a great conversation because it had a great story on how we can really think about opening up access to people rather than it being a gathering of the elitist, right? So I think that was a
Yes.
great conversation. A couple of other pods that I think are always super interesting for me is one, Dwarkesh Patel, very deep tech conversations with some of the who's who of the tech world. Very deep. Sometimes you and I need to kind of listen to it a couple of times to absorb it and really appreciate the content that's coming out there. William Dalrymple and Anita Anand, Empire. I think everything from the Gold Hanger series. I think there are tons of them. The rest is classified. The rest is politics, and so on. I think there are quite a few of them out there which are really really good. Reading, I think other than books, I'm doing a lot of general reading on Substack. I picked up like for the newsletters. I get a lot of like-minded thoughts on Substack. I think there's tons of good writers in there
Yeah.
who could be amazing. I've subscribed to Lenny Ratchetsky and publication called Cricket et al.
Hmm.
Written by Gideon Haigh and Peter Lawler from Australia. It's not just the way they write, but it is also how they connect different aspects, whether it is talking about an old storyline or an old folklore, and connecting that to Twitter, or connecting that to cricket, and how they kind of also bring in some music elements and so on. So I kind of love a lot of content which has a crossover in one sense, and which does not really run in silos, saying that, hey, if I'm
Yeah.
reading biology, I should only read biology.
Yeah.
Biology can also have a connection with cultural studies in
Yes.
terms of how people operate and so on. So I love those kind of intersections in everything I read. So I would say, yeah, those are
That's
some of
great.
the
That's
elements.
that's that's probably going to tide us over to the new year. And of course, your
Yeah.
newsletter the same way. I think has multiple topics. It's not siloed,
Yeah.
and it's a
Yeah.
huge recommendation.
Yeah.
As we wind down for the moment, Shri, is there anything you'd like to share in terms of gratitude? Anything you're grateful for that you'd like to share?
I'm always grateful to everybody that I interact with, whether it's in person, whether it's online, the conversations that we have. And I think one of the things that I'm always geared to do, whether outside the realms of a resolution, is if I can help anybody be a touch better than what they were yesterday, I would treat that as an opportunity and would be highly obliged to help anybody realize the true potential of themselves. So I think that is what I take into 2026. That's what I've been taking into every year, and that kind of keeps me going. That's like my mission statement on helping people be a better version of themselves as we go along. And it could mean anything. It could be the way we behave at work. It could be, professional aspirations. It could be personal growth. It could be anything of that sort. So I think
Yeah,
that's something that I'm really geared and kicked about.
that's lovely. Very, very inspiring. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you for taking the time for having this conversation with me. And of course, for coming also to the Mumbai book launch. There were
Oh
so many
yeah, I
cancellations that
loved
day,
it.
but it was very kind of you. I was so happy to see
Yeah.
you there.
No,
Very happy.
thank you so much, Amrita. As usual, it's always a delight having a conversation with you, and I look forward to your next book.
Thank you so much. And we will be in touch.
Take care.
Thank you.